Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the POW movement.
Welcome to the Powell Movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and I'm just back from emceeing the High Fives Silver Tie Gala in Reno, Nevada, and what a time. The whole High Fives crew really does change lives and creates hope, and I'm stoked they included me for their most important night of the year fundraising-wise. And it was also a great escape for me, not to forget what's going on at home, but it was a way not to think about it that much, and I really needed that. And while I don't like to toot my own horn, toot toot, I crushed this black tie event and was already invited to MC next year's. So like I've said, if you have an event and you want to make it better, hire me. If you want the same old thing that you've been doing year after year, well, keep doing the same old thing and it won't be as good. Finally, for all of you that are wondering about what the High Five Silver Tie Gala is about, well, it's about all the High Five athletes, it's about all the programs they put together each year, and it's about all the people who really create a special community. So if you have a chance to make it next year, the stories, the stoke, and even the tears made this event so special. What else is special is the holidays. I hope everyone is enjoying time with friends and family or loved ones. Cherish that shit, because you never know what'll happen in life. But you do know what's going to happen on this podcast. I'll interview a guest. But since this is Christmas, I'm giving you 2 guests. That's right, it's a gift for you. I'm going to start this podcast off with the VP of Brand over at Outdoor Research, Chris King, and then we jump into the team captain over at Outdoor Research for all their athletes. He's also the athlete director at Protect Our Winters. He's a world-renowned alpinist. I'm talking about Graham Zimmerman, who just put out a book, A Fine Line, and we talk about that and some of his life and times. So this one is both business and pleasure. Before we get into it, I want to thank you for listening each week. There are about 8,000 of you out there, and if each one of you tell a friend, think of how big the show could get. Please do that for me, and I really, really appreciate it. I also appreciate you sharing my social posts or creating your own about the show for people to see. It really does help the show grow. Finally, please support the amazing brands that make this thing happen. They are Stanley, Outdoor Research, Best Day Brewing, Elan Skis, and Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. Now, it's time for Chris King and then Graham Zimmerman. I'm going to start this one out with a situation that no marketing person wants to deal with. Recently, an OR employee and an ambassador was called out by an athlete at another brand for a social issue which we don't need to touch on. But the accusations were false. The athlete who made them has made false accusations against other people before. But this thing blew up on social media. Did it get crazy in your world?
Yeah, it was definitely a situation that I had never dealt with personally. But knowing that other brands go through it, obviously seeing other brands go through it, social media is a very powerful tool. And I think it does a really good job of holding people accountable. But now I think it also fuels cancel culture in a very sometimes treacherous way and can often awaken both sides of an argument. And I think you really tend to see the harshest people come together, whether, they're from one side or the other. People just use social media, I think, to take out frustration or, be the armchair quarterback.
I mean, is it the first time that you've seen a situation play out where lies on social media impacted an innocent party's life and livelihood because it causes damage to the OR brand? And regardless if you're an athlete, an employee, if you do something or you're in the center of something that causes damage to a brand, you have to go. And that's just part of the game, unfortunately. But this is like a weird thing where this guy didn't do anything wrong, but someone else did something wrong, which affects his life and livelihood.
What happened was, unfortunately, it was a late night conversation in one of the rowdiest bars in Bozeman, Montana. And I think regardless of what the conversation was, I think that both people didn't use their best judgment in that conversation. And I think oftentimes, when people are intoxicated, they tend to say things they wish they hadn't said. And unfortunately for the OR employee, if you're representing a company, you got to be smart about the situations that you put yourself in. And on the other end, for the North Face athlete, you also got to be smart about the words that you say on social media. And I think the poor part about this is that, the next day we were on the phone with both parties trying to figure out if there was a way to come together on this and a way to use it as an example for future education. And unfortunately, that ended up not being an option. And I think the really challenging part for us was that people wanted an answer from us in 24 hours. And I think that it was a bit of a witch hunt. And I think that given how fast things move these days, given how fast we pull in content into our daily lives, things like this don't move in 24 hours. And I think, I learned a lot. Would I go through it a little bit differently? Totally. But I think, you're trying to protect the brand, you're trying to protect your employee, and really you're just trying to get the full story, because what ended up happening were just stories that were spiraling out of control on both sides. And for us, it's hard to really understand, what did happen. And I think it was just a very unfortunate situation for both parties. That's all I can really say on that. And we ended up taking the brunt of it from both sides, which was tough.
Yeah, that does suck. And I would think it's a learning experience for everyone involved. And for you, how do you prep ambassadors and coworkers and everybody else around to make sure that these situations don't happen in the future? Because I'm sure it creates some company-wide meetings and gets people talking about, hey, how can we make sure that we can not control the narrative, but we know we're just good people going out in the field when we're doing what we're doing?
That was another tough part, is I think what happened was you had people that were going after ambassadors that worked for OR, for no reason. It's just like sometimes we see hate on one end, and then there's also hate on the other side too. And I think that left the ambassadors in a tough spot, before they even knew what had happened that night. So what we tried to do was really communicate very clearly. And then going forward on that, when I speak with our ambassadors, it's really about this brand that you're building on social media is so delicate in the way that anyone can get their supporters together and can cancel somebody in a matter of minutes. And so when you are building this brand on social media of yourself, you do need to be super, super calculated. And unfortunately, the hard part about that is that it takes away who people truly are. And they have to kind of portray this perfect person on social media with perfect photos and perfect brand activations. And I think it kind of gives people a bit of a fear factor on, what they truly want to be on social media. And that's kind of just the really hard part about this whole situation, is that going through this, we definitely are changing the way that we're posting. And I'm sure that people who also were monitoring the situation are also changing the way about that. And I think that that's honestly the worst part about everything.
I mean, we think about cancel culture, and I think of it more of like a Hollywood type thing, but I never really think about it in the outdoor sports community. But it can happen anywhere, and this is a learning experience where, hey, one thing goes wrong and you never know what's going to happen because things can spiral out of control on social media. And that's my controversial intro, and it wasn't that bad. I think you handled it very, very well.
Oh, thank you.
No, you're welcome.
Yeah, big learning experience.
Yeah. So we're going to jump into your past, and it looks like you were born and raised in Seattle. And knowing that you went to a nice private school like O'Day, I'm guessing there wasn't too much struggling going on at home. O'Day's an all-male school in Washington, right in Seattle. It seems to have killer sports and academics. What did you play at O'Day?
I'm a large human. And so I think a lot of people assume that I was, football through and through, but I was fairly into golf at a young age and kind of wanted to be competitive about that. So I was a golfer, the most extreme sport. I was a golfer in high school.
And I'm sure O'Day's golf program was great. I think all their sports are great.
Yeah.
What else were you passionate about as a kid? Like, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I loved being creative. I loved art. I loved golfing. I wanted to, go as far as I could with that. And skiing was life for me back then, and always trying to ski as much as possible and be on the Stevens Pass ski bus growing up. And being creative was really important to me. And I think when you are growing up, creative is kind of a tough thing because, most people, I think, assume that you can't make money in creative. And so from there, was definitely pushed into more of a business mindset and kind of being good at math and that kind of stuff. But yeah, being creative and in art was a huge thing for me, along when getting a chance to ski as often as possible.
And then you graduate from O'Day, you end up going to Carroll College, you study international business and marketing. And being that your college is in Montana, are you skiing a shitload during school?
Yes, skiing quite a bit, as much as we could, probably at least a couple days a week. And then was also playing golf in college as well there, and really enjoying all the outdoor activities that Montana had to offer. I'd never spent time in Montana before then, And that was a really special point in my life. Definitely getting an itch to be outside as often as possible and kind of being in a different place other than Seattle with a different set of people and really a culture for the outdoors that I'd never experienced. So from that standpoint, it was definitely a wonderful 4 years.
I went to an average public college. I studied marketing, and it seemed to give me an overview of a lot of different terms, but I didn't really learn how to do anything until I got my first real marketing job. Carroll College is an expensive private school, and do you get a lot more real-world experience compared to a state school, or is it pretty much the same thing as what I experienced, a lot of drinking and figuring out life and learning?
Yeah, I would say the latter, most likely. The Carroll decision was made for me because of getting a scholarship to play golf there and also being close to skiing. From a marketing perspective, I think I didn't really, you kind of take in responsibility and accountability. And for me, just being able to, get through the school year was a challenge enough there. And did I really pick up key marketing tools? I would say probably not.
You're a college scholarship athlete. I didn't realize that. Are you like a D1 college golfer?
Nope, D3. So kind of the third level of that.
But you get to travel all over the country to play golf?
Yeah, kind of throughout the Northwest, like, Montana, Oregon, Washington, Utah, kind of in that little region up there.
Have you ever had a hole-in-one? And when you do you have to buy the whole bar, shots or drinks? I don't really golf.
I've had some amazing rounds in golf, but never a hole-in-one. Lots of close calls.
But if you do, you're supposed to buy everybody a drink.
You do. Yep. You do have to buy everyone in the bar a drink if you do get a hole-in-one, depending on where you're at.
Thinking of drinks, I would think that you need to be a good drinker because when you graduate, the world is at a time where everyone is being laid off. The economy's total shit. And was it kind of like, holy shit, what am I going to do with my degree?
Yeah, very much so. It kind of started to trickle in the fall after I graduated in 2008. I moved to Vail to pursue like a marketing internship at a local television station down there. And for being someone that was as interested in snow sports as I was, it was kind of the perfect situation. And then, the real world hits and you understand, the kind of money you need to make to live in a place like that. So then from there, it was back home and there were no jobs to be had anywhere. And so I started bartending and then eventually got like a pretty low level marketing position.
The marketing that you did, it's not really the sexy kind of marketing that you're doing now. You're marketing in the financial sector. And when you're doing that, is it pretty much writing boring press releases and producing photo shoots around meetings?
Not even that good. Mostly just creating magazine advertisements for financial outlets and then photographing some warehouses and, pretty not that exciting. But, at that point, I think the job market was so challenging that I was just happy to have a job and happy to be getting experience. Other things came up in that job that, were kind of crazy looking back on it, but it was at least a start where I feel like a lot of people didn't even have a start at that point. So that was good.
And I think this is when you really start getting into photo and video, and it sounds like you're producing ads and stuff like that. So are you able to pretty much get a camera through work and computer through work and kind of learn the whole production of photos and advertisements on the dime and then kind of create a side hustle on the side after that?
Exactly. Yeah, I had some experience in my internship in Colorado learning how to edit. And then it was at that point that camera equipment was much more accessible to create high quality content. And I was trying to get out of my job as fast as I could at that point. And I'd always had a passion for photography throughout college and was never the best skier on the mountain. So was always shooting my friends doing that. And eventually you start to get to a point where businesses around you are, investing in more video content, and saw some opportunities with some local businesses around me and decided, I was going to quit that job with a couple $1,000 in the bank and go out on my own, which was interesting in itself.
When you go out on your own and you start your own thing, Travels Through Images, when I look at some of the people that you shot with and some of the things that you did, this is a big deal. I mean, you shot Street League, you shot Steve Aoki, you did projects with Nike, Adidas, Chevrolet, a lot of local brands. And with this job, working with all these brands and stuff, are they pretty much giving you the creative and the product and then you take it from there? Or is it more involved with the brand side where they're actually sending people out to work with you?
It was kind of just, lower level projects. for the most part. It was, hey, we need to shoot this person or this car or this event. And if you could make some sort of a sizzle video out of that or a brand video or something like that, it was very minimal direction because, if you go back to that time, the only types of video content that were really out there was stuff for TV. And then these, 15, 20-minute brand videos that would be on websites. And so this was definitely a bit of a new time for video. And I think just having assets to even use, was such a treat for companies, and they could spend 3, 4, 5, 6 grand on a video asset instead of dropping 50 to 100 grand on a highly produced piece that they may only have the opportunity once or twice a year to do so. And so it definitely started very small with very small projects, going out on Facebook.
Is this where you kind of learn how to work with athletes and talent and plan a shoot from start to finish?
Yeah, those first 4 years of that were for sure a master's degree in business. And I would always say, I'd never thought that I was the best filmer out there or the best editor, but I thought I had a real knack for business development and getting clients, because that's really 75 to 80% of the job is you got to keep the business coming in. And then from there, as I would spend more time on that, I would, bring on others to help work with me and, would definitely take on more of a producer role in a lot of the, higher end commercial work that we did.
So from the beginning, though, you're almost like a one-man show within the business.
For sure.
Like you're generating all the new business, building the websites, planning the shoots, and pretty much running every facet of your own business in the beginning. Does that get to be like a 60, 70-hour-a-week job?
Oh, yeah. It was everything, which was probably the best education, I could have ever gotten. And it was like you get to hour 50 in the week, and it's hard to spend time on the actual product that got you started in the first place. And so the first 3 or 4 years, it was definitely a lot of hours, and it was just really trying to understand what the most viable product was for clients and how I could spend the least amount of time on it.
You build that thing, but you're traveling like 6 months a year, and you can only last so long when you have a wife and a baby on the way. So you shut down the business and you take a job with Rover. And with this gig, you're creating content around dogs. And I would think humans take direction, and it would be much more of a challenge with an animal. What was the hardest part about working with canine talent?
Yeah, that was an interesting one. I kind of was at a stage with TTI where, we were bringing in a good amount of income during the year. Shoots were becoming more expensive, jumping into that world of, $50,000, $75,000, $100,000 shoots, which again comes with more risk and more accountability from clients. And there is vulnerability in all of that. And I did have a daughter back in 2017. And my wife and I just, had the conversation of maybe taking a break, for 3 or 4 years, just while she was young and growing up and not traveling 6 months a year. And so the Rover job came open, and it definitely concerned me going into it. I'd never worked in the tech space before, but I knew that it would really challenge me to learn something new and to put myself out of my comfort zone of shooting fun stuff like car commercials and ski commercials and travel videos and that kind of thing. And so, yeah, shooting dogs is very challenging. Very few of them actually listen, surprisingly.
Any funny stories? They ever shit on the set? They ever bite you? Anything fun like that?
I mean, you learn very quickly that not all dogs are built the same, and you get your favorites very fast. But yeah, I mean, poop everywhere, dogs tearing down sets, ripping down lights. Yeah, and throughout that, there's dogs that are very well behaved and will do everything you say. And I think through the years at Rover and trying to build that content studio, you definitely have your key favorites that you can get it done with.
Now it's time for my first sponsor break. And for over 75 years, Elan Skis has been building world-class skis in the Slovenian Alps. It's real skiers building skis with the highest quality materials in the world. And I'm not just saying that. Elan is not only known for skis, they also build luxury yachts, so there's no cutting corners on anything. It's all about delivering the best on-mountain experience to skiers all over the world. And while Elan has been killing it in Europe for decades, over the past 10 years, they've been building a cult following here in the States, because it's hard not to love a playful ski that's rock solid underfoot, and a ski that makes you a better skier. Their award-winning Ripstick line has proven time and again to do this, and has a waist width for everyone. But that's not all Elan has to offer. Their brand new Playmaker series in waist widths of 101 and 91 have won all the awards, and they're the perfect tools for landing switch in the park or backcountry. So please do me and yourself a favor. The next time you demo a ski, try Elan and ski what I'm talking about. You can find out more about Elan over at elanskis.com. Next up is where I want you to buy your Elan skis from. Peter Glenn Ski and Sports have been getting people on the snow since 1958. They aren't one of the newer internet companies trying to take over the world with product lines and hotels. They do one thing: get you dialed in with the right gear for your adventure or vacation. They take pride in being the best at that. And whether you're experiencing the best-in-class retail experience or the 5-star rated website based on the almost 13,000 reviews they have, Peter Glenn has all the brands, all the products, and if you can't get the Peter Glenn experience in person, well, their website offers free shipping on orders over $49, a hassle-free return policy, and they'll price match. That's right. If you find something cheaper at a reputable dealer, contact Peter Glenn, let them know, and they'll match that price. If you like this podcast, please do that for me. To find out more about all things Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, head on over to peterglenn.com. My final sponsor this round is Stanley, a brand located right down the street from me here in Seattle, and the only brand I trust to keep my drinks hotter and colder than anyone else. Stanley is the best at this. I mean, they invented the category, and they are the all-inclusive brand that wants to outfit everyone's adventures. Stanley isn't going to sell you a $300 cooler. What they are going to do is offer you best-in-class product for a reasonable price. And these days, with ski resorts charging $30 for a burger, there's never been a better time to load up on Stanley's food storage supplies and save your family a lot of money by bringing your home-cooked goodness to the mountains. Whether you like them piping hot or ice cold, Stanley delivers. And while Stanley always offers a code for the best possible discounts to Powell Movement listeners, there won't be a code for the next couple weeks as Stanley has its holiday deals live on its website, and you can save up to 60% off select items. To get the deals and find out more about all things Stanley, head on over to stanley1913.com and go shopping. Those are my sponsors. Now let's jump back into the podcast. Right before the pandemic starts, I think you leave Rover, you take a job with Bamboo, and this is the first time you're going to be managing people, or a big group of people it seems like, but it's right around the same time that the pandemic hits. Do you get any office time with your team, or is it pretty much like a remote job where you're trying to manage people who don't know you?
No, it was straight in. I quickly realized after being at Rover for a couple of years that moving up the ladder was going to be a challenge. The great thing is about Rover is they are so loyal to their employees. And I think that creates an arena that lets people really do the jobs they do well. But it is a long tenure to kind of move up the ranks there. And I decided that it was time to move. And yeah, so the Bamboo job came up. And as I took that job, I traveled to Hawaii with my wife and kiddo. And then they shut down everything and quickly realized that there was going to be no big, awesome office in Fremont that I had been to prior. And yeah, right into remote work, managing 8 different people that I didn't know. And it was interesting.
It's got to be such a challenge because normally you want to build a rapport with these people that are working for you so they want to run through a wall for you. But with Zoom meetings, I would think that's a lot harder to do. Did you ever really fully click with the team, or is it just doing as much as you could through the pandemic?
Yeah, great question. It became really transactional, and I feel like I lost one of my best skill sets, and that was interacting with people, because you can only interact on a Zoom meeting so much. And once that was removed, I really needed to, work on some other facets of how I did that job well, and managing that many people at once was something I, had never done before. And the really cool part about Bamboo was, even though I have this huge creative background, I wasn't the one doing the creative, and the responsibility that was put towards me was just making sure that people were good. People's mental health was good. They knew that they were being taken care of, and mostly that they had a manager that was just worried about their well-being so that they could do their best job possible. And it was a huge learning experience for me doing that every day. And some days are better than others. Those days of taking 8 hours of Zoom meetings and then, coming out of the office are just it's hard. It's hard at an agency when you're kind of just the fire putter outer. And I think most ad agencies work that way whenever you kind of climb up the ranks and get to a director level, but some good experiences and some not so good for sure.
Well, you were able to transition out of Bamboo to an absolute dream job for a guy that grew up in the Northwest skiing. how'd you land your first job at OR and what was your title?
Someone sent me, I can't remember who it was, but it was a LinkedIn position or a LinkedIn job posting, and it was for a creative director at a Seattle outdoor industry job. And I had like a few ideas of who it was, hit up the recruiter and found out that it was OR. And I didn't have a huge knowledge of the brand prior. I knew that it was heavy duty gloves, gear for people who were backcountry to the max, ski patroller type gear, but obviously was something that could get me back to the outdoor industry at a level that I thought was sustainable for my family and I. And yeah, so went through quite a long interview process, one of the longest ones I've ever done, but good because you get to know everyone really well. And so yeah, that first job ended up being a senior director of brand creative.
Is this when you start working with the athletes?
No, we did have a team manager when I got here, but kind of found out that the ambassador team needed a bit of a revamp, and a team manager is a tough position to fill, I think, just because it's someone who obviously needs to manage people, but at the salary that companies pay team managers, and I'm sure you could speak to this, you've got to learn how to deal with team members in the best way possible and make sure that they know that you're in support of them and you're their friend, but you also have to have difficult conversations sometimes in the same way. And I think that we had a tough time doing that, nor were we kind of creating a 40-hour-a-week job. It wasn't in need of as much attention as we initially thought.
So eventually that's all put under your plate of managing all the athletes?
Yeah, it was. The marketing team was kind of going through a bit of a turnover at that time. And I had some knowledge of the outdoor sports that we were representing. And so I knew that, the most important thing for our team was, just the basics. We needed to make sure that everyone was good on their contract. They understood their expectations. Everyone had gear. We were getting people onto photo shoots. And, before we could go above that, we needed to meet those expectations. So that's kind of what I really focused on the first 12 months.
And you're working with some of the best athletes in the world, and you're not on that level. Does that ever scare or bother you or anything like that?
Not so much. I'd worked with other, skiers and snowboarders beforehand, and obviously being a general fan of skiing myself, it's always awesome to be around people who are excelling so highly at their sport. And I think that oftentimes being an ambassador, I think people on our team just want to make sure that they feel supported. And, we're a small company, and sometimes we make missteps or sometimes we don't provide the perfect support. But I think overall, I wanted to make sure that our athletes felt taken care of. They felt supportive. They felt like we were a fan of what they were doing. So did I get nervous? Not so much. But I think, has there been moments when I've been skiing or mountain biking with our ambassadors that I felt like I was a little bit out of my comfort zone? Absolutely.
Your role is to make everyone comfortable and get the most out of them when you're at a shoot. Your role's a lot bigger than that. But on the shoots, when you go and you're producing content, you have to have everybody respect and like you. And you have to have everybody want to almost run through a wall for you, like I was saying earlier. And knowing you and following you on social media, it seems like you're a gourmet chef. And is that one of the tricks that you pull out of your hat when you're on one of these trips? Is like you're the dude meal prepping and everybody's like, holy shit, we're eating like kings tonight. Thank you, Chris.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've learned probably for, 10 years now that if you can keep people well fed and make sure they can get a beer at the end of the day, shoots tend to go a lot better rather than eating fast food and, staying at a Motel 6.
Something else you bring to the table is just understanding the whole production of shoots. When I worked with OR years back, they would have huge photo shoots and they would have like 20 people on site for a photo shoot. And it would be like the Chase Jarvises of the world, the most expensive photographers out there. And do you come in and realize with your experience that, hey, we don't need all these people and we can scale back and cut off like 30 grand worth of what we were paying for before and get the exact same quality photos with hiring Colton Jacobs or something like that?
Absolutely. Yeah, that was one of the first challenges when I got in here, is I was told right away is that we didn't have the photo content that we needed. And what was happening is that, we are a smaller brand and we do have limited content budgets each year that are, 5 to 10% the size of our competitors. And I found out that, we were doing one photo shoot a year and, pretty much spending it all on, one photographer, one production company. And that doesn't mean that they didn't get great content. But what happened was, we make a ton of stuff at OR and it's hard to go on one 5-day shoot to Baker with 20 people hiking the arm, trying to get photos of 4 different products. I mean, it gets really, really challenging, especially in the more wintry scenarios. And so, yeah, I kind of brought in people that I knew really well, definitely scaled back, put myself in where I needed to, and really started to build shoots that obviously we trimmed the fat as much as we could, but also wanted to make sure that we had a sustainable goal in mind of, how many images we could capture that were great in a 3 or 4 day period. That was the first big challenge for sure.
How difficult is it when you have to call those legacy photographers who expect 30 grand from OR this year and let them know that, hey, we're changing things up, and I know you've been doing this for 10 years and you expect this, but it's not happening anymore? I mean, does that make you the bad guy?
Oh, yeah. I had to be the bad guy a lot the first few months. And I think that it never gets easier being the bad guy. And yeah, I mean, we had some photographers that we were using that were charging day rates of some of the highest paid photographers in the sports world. And again, if you are a content creator and you can go out and get those rates, I'm your biggest fan, because you have to do that not only to stay competitive, but to survive. And the problem is that we just couldn't spend an entire photo budget on one shoot to fulfill, the financial needs of the people that worked with the company. And so it wasn't so much hey, your photography or videography isn't good. It was, we have to pull back a little bit. And I also think that when you make a marketing transition at a company, that person is going to pull in the people that they trust or have worked with in the past. I mean, it happened to me all the time when, marketing people would change at companies. That usually meant the end of a relationship. And I think it just kind of comes with the trade too.
Fair enough. And another thing that changed, or it seemed to get more robust when you came in, was the whole athlete mix. Did you have to drop people, or did you just mess with the budget where you could get some big name athletes?
Yeah, we did have to make some changes. We had gone very heavy into climbing, and I think that just came to be based on the current interest of the marketing team before me. But we needed to put support into some larger business drivers, and the ski team, Micah and Sophia had just come on recently, which was awesome, and Zach Giffen was on there. But after that, it had become a little stagnant. And so I knew that we really needed to put some more horsepower into that to really help generate the views that we needed on our outerwear. And so I think the transition overall was pretty good. I've definitely heard podcasts out there with some people who are a little more bitter than others. And I think oftentimes those people don't know what's going on the inside from the business perspective. And honestly, it's the hardest part of having ambassador teams for sure.
And I would think that more outerwear is sold on the ski end of things, but that's just me. I mean, what's the breakup there? Is it more like 60-40 ski to climbing in terms of sales?
Yeah, and the thing about climbing is that where it once was in a very technical product space, just the trend of climbing was moving more towards, khakis and t-shirts and Nike Dunks. And that wasn't really the gear that we were making. And it also isn't a lot of that gear that can really push high numbers. And so we still have some amazing climbers on our team right now. We just kind of had to pull back because the mix just didn't equate to the profits.
So you've got climbers, you've got skiers, snowboarders, and then I was looking at Crankworx and it was brought to you by OR. How the hell does that happen? Because that's a huge play into a big market that you guys really haven't been a player in.
Yeah, that's been a big thing for us. When I got here, the product team had already kind of started the mountain biking discussion. And we weren't fully bought into it right away just because we knew it was a competitive landscape. There's obviously some incredible brands out there that do make great product. There are some outdoor brands out there that have tried their hand at mountain biking product. And we didn't really go full send into that until we kind of had a large customer survey that really told us that people were already coming to Outdoor Research to buy mountain biking product. It was actually our third most popular activity. And so I think when we figured that out, we started going deep into focus groups and product research for mountain biking and creating a collection there. And the mountain biking space is a very loyal customer base. And I think it's hard to come in not being, a perennial bike brand and come in and say, hey, we also make great product and we can also play in this lane. But I think if you don't make a splash right off the bat, I think it's really easy to get passed by. And so started having the discussions with the Crankworx folks and really thought about, if we're going to make a splash in the mountain bike world, being a principal sponsor of Crankworks along with SRAM and Maxis would do that.
And what was the thought process? Because I would think there's a couple of different ways you can do it. It's like we could get one or two huge athletes, or we could sponsor the biggest event in the world. Was that kind of the thing? Is like, do we do one or the other? And you decided to go after the biggest event in the world, which I think was a great play.
Yeah, and we're starting small this year. So we have 3 mountain bikers on our team who I think are definite leaders in the sport.
Who are the mountain bikers?
We've got Damon Iwanaga, who's kind of a mainstay in the Fest series for the past few years, and just someone who's been around the culture for the last 5 years. And he was the first one that we brought on and has been just an amazing person to work with as far as product development. And then cat's not out of the bag yet, but we do have Bas van Steenbergen, who's been the king of Crankworks for multiple years, and a Canadian rider who I think is one of the most well-faceted riders.
Yep.
And then our female representative is going to be Georgia Astle, who's kind of someone who's been rising the ranks out of Whistler and has started to become one of the top females in the game.
Nice. So when you came into OR, it was a time of huge change. The product line was transitioning from being like totally technical, functional outerwear brand. You know, you guys still do that, but now you're making gear that looks a lot cooler. Who is the main driver of that vision, and is it working? Like, are you seeing sales increase by creating cooler stuff?
Yeah, totally. You know, that train had started before I got here. There was a lot of changes that were made at the executive level, bringing on new leadership into the company, really beefing up the product team and putting enough people on that team to not only design great gear, but also make the gear great. And so they had a vision that I think really started back in 2020. And, you know, to really push forward new product and kind of get it out in the market takes about 3 years. And so I would say, you know, fall of 22, spring 23 is when a lot of the new stuff started coming out. And we did notice an immediate uptick in growth. And we've been investing a lot, obviously Crankworks, but, you know, a lot of marketing dollars, whether it be our ambassador team, whether it be, you know, catalogs or social media advertising or TV, investing there quite a bit. But, you know, when it comes down to it, you have to make great product. I tell people all the time that the product team has done such a great job here that if you can get a piece of OR clothing in someone's hands that's interested in buying some technical apparel, it's a fairly easy sell. And so what we're really dealing with now is trying to get the brand in front of people because it's still a brand that not a lot of people know about.
No, I mean, it's one of those things where it's like you guys are right on the cusp of being able to compete with like the North Face and the Patagonias, but you guys aren't that huge of a company. Like your marketing department's probably 3 or 4 people compared to their 30 or 40 people. And it's like you're the small dog playing against the big guys. And you guys have hired one of the big dogs from Lululemon, a guy named Felix Del Toro, to be VP of product. When that was announced, were people stoked? And what do you think the changes that he'll bring to the brand are?
Yeah, great question. So Liz Wilson was our past head of product, and she made a lot of those early changes and definitely got things pointed in the right direction. And then when she left us a few months back to go to Rosignol, we really looked at this hire as the next great step for the company. The product situation, you know, was definitely a big, big decision. And I think can often guide the direction of the company for the next few years. And so we really wanted to find someone that had experience at large companies because we're always looking to find and create that product that we can sell 20, 30, 40, 50,000 units of. That's how you really scale as a company. And we are still working on trying to figure that out because that's one of the ways that we're going to be able to grow and get into the hands of people that, you know, there's a lot of people that look at us as a new brand. And so Felix came in and he really had that experience while also just being a very warm person, very calculated. And, you know, he's been here for almost a month and I think has made such a great impact. So it'll be interesting to see how someone kind of comes in from the athleisure side of things, really looks at outdoor research and figures out, you know, how can I take this company with, you know, an incredible reputation and 40 years of heritage and turn it into that competitive outdoor company with the other big three.
There's a lot of other brands that have been out and around, but what I find is interesting is like the online dealers that some of them have brick and mortar stores now. They're creating their own product lines and they're selling them through their retail chains and competing with their other vendors. What do you guys think about that, of like retailers creating product lines to compete with vendors?
Oh man, that's a big conversation. I think it's hard we definitely have relationships with some great retailers, and sometimes you see a product that looks exactly like your product. And it's kind of the biggest form of flattery when something like that happens. But I think, the in-house brand, it's become the largest percentage holder of the total outdoor goods sold is those companies that do that right now. Margins can be great. The world is your oyster when it comes to the knowledge of the product that sells in your stores. And I think it's a very easy formula to find a product that works in your stores, use whatever you think is great from that product and create your own. I've seen it work really well, and I've also seen it not work very well.
All right. And do you see a day when there's in every city an OR store?
I think so. We try to not drink our own Kool-Aid inside the building of OR, but we are definitely at that cusp right now. We noticed, that we're growing a lot this year where other brands are starting to not grow as much. And I think that interest is out there. Our team here works really hard on trying to become that brand. So yes, I am confident that we can get there, but the next couple of years will really start to kind of lay that story out.
All right. And that's pretty much what I wanted to talk about. And I'm a big fan of the moves that the brand has been making. And I'm stoked that you're putting a lot more focus into skiing. And I guess OR is always going to be supporting climbers out there. And an OR climber and athlete, Graham Zimmerman, he wrote a book recently, and he had his PR firm reach out to me for an interview. And while I'm not going to do a super deep interview with Graham because I'm not a climber, we are going to chat. And I would love to have you ask Graham the inappropriate questions.
Cool.
Before you do that, can I get you to give a little intro for Graham? Who is he?
Yeah, totally. So Graham has been a mainstay on the OR team for a while now, and he is definitely, his roots are in climbing, but the man is a beast of an alpinist. Graham has gone on some amazing trips on K2. He's climbed some amazing first descents around North America and is one of the all-around greatest ice climbers out there right now. And not only all of those things, but he's just a wonderful human to be around and has been around the industry for such a long time and has really started to play more of a role in understanding product sustainability, understanding how we as outdoor companies can be better land stewards. And really, as he steps into the next stage of his career, as we all do, he's definitely taken a bigger responsibility in the education of sustainability. So he's old OR family and someone who I definitely don't get to spend enough time with, but every time I do, it's always a pleasure.
It's time for my second round of sponsors. And even before Outdoor Research started sponsoring this podcast, I was rocking a lot of their gear because nothing else I've used before holds up in the brutal weather that the Pacific Northwest delivers. Everywhere you go in the PNW, you're going to see a ton of OR gear. And that's because the locals know that while other brands may spend a lot more marketing dollars, OR keeps you drier and warmer every time. And that's what it's all about. Well, it's also about looking good. And while OR used to be all about technical mountaineering gear, and they still do that, they've changed a bit. They've hired new designers and partnered with some of the most incredible athletes in ski and snowboard, like backcountry legend Mark Abma, world champion free skier Troy Podmilsack, X Games gold medalist Zoe Atkin, and snowboarder Neil Provo, who are making sure the new fits look as good as they perform in the elements. You can check out all things OR over at outdoorresearch.com, and when you check out, enter the code SKI25, that's all caps and the number 25 with no spaces, and I'm going to save you 25% off your order. Sale items and pro products are excluded. My final sponsor, and one that's a daily driver for me, is Best Day Brewing. They are hands down the best flavors in non-alcoholic beer. That's right, life isn't all about drinking too much. It's all about having your best days ever, and to do that, you need something that won't slow you down. That's where Best Day comes into play. It has all the flavor of your alcoholic beer, but none of the alcohol. Meaning you can have a few, and then you can drive yourself, your kids. You can drive anyone anywhere because you're going to be clear-headed and ready to go. I'm not telling everyone to quit drinking alcohol altogether. Sure, a few beers can be fun, but now, when I drink alcoholic beer, I mix a few Best Days in to make sure that I'm not that guy. You know what I'm talking about. And if you're cutting out alcohol completely, congrats. Finding Best Day will make that easier than ever. And coming in at less than 75 calories, you won't be packing on the pounds like your regular IPAs do. Best Day is brewed for the doers of winter. The skiers, the snowboarders, the snowmobilers, the sled doggers, the ski bladers, the splitboarders, the racers, the snowshoers, and everyone in between. So next time you're at the store, pick up a 6-pack of Best Day. And if you can't find it at the store, you can always go to bestdaybrewing.com or find it on Amazon. Those are my sponsors. Now let's get back into the podcast. First and foremost, you wrote a book, A Fine Line, and I highly recommend it to anyone who listens to this podcast. And while I'm not a climber or a mountaineer or anything sort of like that, for some reason I've always loved books on the subject, and yours is really well done. But what was also really well done was your PR push for this one. And between October 1st and today, how many placements do you think you've earned?
Oh, man. I think that I've probably gotten 30 to 40 placements. And I got to say that a lot of that is due to the team at Mountaineers Books. They have been awesome. And I just told them, like, listen, I put 2 years into writing this book, and you've got all of my time and energy towards anything that we can do in terms of telling the story, in terms of getting this out in the world. And they really took that and ran with it, and it's gone really well. I've been super impressed, and it's actually been really like gratifying and fun to have a lot of conversations around this. And a big part of that's also been a book tour that's involved about 20 stops or so far. Been in the UK, been in Canada, been all over the American West talking about the book. It's been really great to dig in. And the best part for me has been hearing what others got from the book. I mean, this is like my story, right? Like, this is my stuff, and it has specific meaning to me. But to hear from others what they're getting from it is like really special.
That is really special. But in thinking about the reason that you wrote the book, it wasn't because of the fact that you're one of the most accomplished climbers of the 21st century. And it's not because you have this huge ego and you need to pound your chest by telling all these stories. There was a reason for it. Can you explain the why that you put this book together?
Yeah, I would love to. So first off, I didn't actually pitch this book to Mountaineers Books. I actually went to them pitching a book on climate advocacy and looking to tell other people's stories on getting into the advocacy space. I had a whole pitch for them on that. And they came back and said, hey, listen, this is a great idea. We like it, but we'd actually much rather you tell your story. And we'd much rather have you write a memoir about your journey in this space. And I was a little bit taken aback by that at first. I kind of considered writing a memoir to be something that you do when you're an old guy, when you're like done and looking back. And I'm very much in the middle of my career right now and still super focused on climbing and climate advocacy and how to balance those things with my marriage with Shannon. And so it's kind of like, oh, like, does that mean they think I'm like an old guy and then I'm like finished and it's time to look back? And I told them that, and they were like, oh, no, actually, we're like super into mid-career memoirs, because not only are you writing about something that's happening now, like your perspective is fresh and in the moment, but also accessing those memories from when I was a younger climber, when I was a young man, particularly kind of looking back in my early 20s. You know, if I'm writing back on those days when I'm in my 60s, like, those will be pretty murky memories. The lens of time will be pretty dang murky. And instead, like, we can really kind of get at those things in a way that's meaningful. And that was really cool. And I ended up really appreciating that they brought that to the table.
You had mentioned in the book that you're telling these stories. I mean, obviously, they kind of spun you into telling your personal story, and it's about you. But a lot of these stories only live with you because of a lot of the players that are part of these stories aren't with us anymore. And you need to tell those stories because you're one of the last ones out there. Was that part of it too? That's what I was thinking about with the why.
Yeah, that's a really important question. I really appreciate you digging in on that. I mean, I'll share that at some points writing this book kind of felt like, oh man, all my friends are gone. And that was really hard. But in terms of the kind of like mission or the why, there were really three primary things that I wanted to dig into, three primary things that I really needed to make sure that they shined through. And the first one, like you brought up, was I have lost a lot of friends to mountain climbing. I have lost a lot of people who I really adore and look up to and have enjoyed spending time with. And so to have the opportunity to utilize writing a book in order to memorialize them, to share about them, to share not only my experiences with them, but why I adore those people was really important. And so to be able to memorialize those folks in that way was really special. The other two kind of goals, purpose, why on this were that I've been provided some really good advice over the years as a climber and as an advocate and as just a community member. And I feel like one of the greatest advantages that I've had in my career has actually been that advice and to have the opportunity to share that more broadly, to provide more people access to that really high quality mentorship that I've had over the years is something that I was really proud to be able to do, not only in terms of sharing that input, but also represent where it came from and to talk about folks like Kai Bune, who brought up the 100-year plan, and Steve Swenson, who provided me so much good advice over the years, and my buddy Nick Nyman, who really brought me into the creative space to be able to talk about not only what they brought to my life, but also talk about the characters who are responsible for that was like really cool. And the last kind of like major point of purpose in writing this story was that when I was younger, I was brought up into this culture of mountain climbing that was hyper masculine, that was very Nietzschean tough guy, and had this perspective of if there's anything in your life that is not in service to climbing, then you should make it go away. You should get rid of it so that you can focus on climbing and become the best climber you can be. And it asked me to throw away the relationships that I had and career potential and things like that. And through that advice and through lived experience and through inflection points that are captured in the book and very much are really in my life were oftentimes injuries where I had mandatory downtime, I've really discovered a path where by building in more things around climbing, like my marriage with Shannon, like my work in advocacy, like my career as a community leader, by building those things around climbing and having all those things work in balance or in harmony, I'm actually able to be a much better climber. I go to the mountains with more purpose, with better training, with more intention, and I tend to go with the right people, and we tend to have better strategy. And I also have more reason to make it home safely. And because of all of those things, I feel like I've been able to actually take on bigger objectives. And yeah, like maybe I don't climb as much as I did when I was 22, when I was climbing all the damn time, but the climbing that I do is better. And that's been really cool.
So that's the reason behind the book, the reason behind this interview. Your PR team reached out to me and I was almost unsure if it was going to be a good fit because I'm more of a ski, snowboard podcast, and that's really where I focus on. But I started doing my homework and I noticed on your LinkedIn that you were the team captain of the Outdoor Research athlete team. And Outdoor Research is a sponsor of mine. And I was like, wow, we should do an interview, combine that with something else that I'm doing with Chris King over at OR. And here we are. So what does it mean to be the OR team captain?
Well, I love that. And I'll share that I've been with Outdoor Research for, I think, 15 years now.
Yep.
And so they've really been here for this entire journey and not just kind of as a bystander. Like they have been a very active supporter in this journey. So like being able to speak on that relationship is really great. I really love working with that team. And hearing that they're a sponsor of yours as well is badass. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Yeah, my work with them has been on everything from, the climate and equity work that they're taking on to gear design to, different campaigns over the years. But in terms of the team captain role, that's really been a space in which I'm now kind of one of the more tenured members of the team. I've been around for a while. I'm also not the youngest climber these days at 37 years old. And so there's a lot of opportunity to empower and mentor other folks in the community. And to be able to do that like really specifically with my teammates on the OR team has been really cool. And it's interesting because there's not like a written part of my contract where it's like, oh, you have to have so many meetings with so-and-so per year or something like that. It's more in the realm of like, be available to those folks if they have questions and provide them with a good example of what sustainability in a career can look like and how they can move into that space and continue to thrive. And when it comes down to like that role at Outdoor Research, so much of it is about empowerment. And it's so aligned with like the core of what I want to do with my time as an athlete and just generally here on planet Earth. So yeah, it's been really badass.
While that's really cool, what's equally cool, or maybe more cool and definitely more important, and I found this on your LinkedIn as well, is that you're the director of athletes for Protect Our Winners. Is that a full-time job, and what are you responsible with them?
Yeah, love talking about Protect Our Winners. So back in about 2015, I had my first interaction with POW. I, at that time, had been climbing a lot. I was professional mountain climbing athlete. I had just been a finalist for the PLA d'Or.
And for people that don't know, that award is like the biggest award in climbing, right?
Yes, the PLA d'Or is like the biggest nod you can get in the mountain climbing space.
Okay.
And I should say we won it in 2020, which was badass.
Yeah.
Back in 2015, I was like going to the mountains a lot, and I was very aware of climate change as an issue. In fact, I have an academic background in glaciohydrology, which is like how water flows over, through, and under glaciers. And when you're talking about that stuff, climate change is super close to that entire conversation. And so I've known that climate was a really big problem for a long time. I knew that it was us. I knew that we needed to do something about it. I knew that it was real. But I felt totally unempowered to do so because of the amount of time I was spending in an airplane and the amount of time I was spent traveling and on expeditions. And I really felt like that perceived hypocrisy around my personal footprint was something that made it so that I couldn't communicate on climate effectively. And POW, I kind of gave them that excuse. I said, listen, I would love to work on this stuff, but I feel like I can. And they were like, oh no, dude, don't worry. Here is why you are the perfect person to be working on this. And the kind of cliff notes on that are that it's not through personal change that we drive climate action. We drive it through systemic change by changing the systems in which we live. And so they brought me into the fold with that, and I started working with them a lot, started leveraging my stories from the big mountains of the world and those accolades that I had from climbing in order to go talk to Congress, go talk to the White House, go talk to my community, go talk to my state reps, really drive that conversation forward. And it's really turned into a super meaningful part of what I do. And so I was doing that work as an individual athlete for many years. And then I came on as the team captain of the Protect Our Winners climb program, their climb team. And then, Mike, I've always had a job outside of climbing, which is something else we can talk about.
Oh, we will. I've got questions about that.
Okay, sweet. We'll dig into that in a minute. But at the time, I was running a production company called Bedrock Filmworks with my pal, Jim Aikman. And at the beginning of 2021, POW offered me a full-time position to be director of their Athlete Alliance program, which is like really core to what they do. And it was a really big deal. It was a really big opportunity. So I actually sold my stake in the film company and jumped in with POW full time. And it's been really cool because a big part of my role is in the athlete space. And I really am able to keep driving hard on that athlete work as well.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like you're in the perfect position to channel all of the athlete's energy and kind of harness that towards a common goal. And you've been able to do that with OR. You're able to do that with Protect Our Winners. And then in terms of just like your career as an athlete, when I think about what we were going to talk about when I was coming into this podcast, I started referencing my background in snow, and I'm a desk jockey in snow. But when I was thinking about it, everybody's a skier or a snowboarder in those worlds. And there's so many segments: race, freestyle, free ride, big mountain, telly, backcountry. And what defines me these days is kind of a resort skier. But in your world, everyone's a climber. But what are the segments in that world? And then what's the category that defines you and why?
Yeah. So in terms of like what is climbing, climbing can be a lot of different things. Climbing is in the Olympics these days. There's competition climbing where folks are just doing these incredible things in the competition space, which is oftentimes on artificial walls. And folks are doing these like incredibly hard routes. It's so cool. And then there's rock climbing, which is super multifaceted. Well, that's everything from super challenging move by move routes or boulder problems, up to like going up and like climbing on El Cap. And some of that is climbing, with your hands and feet. Some of that is climbing with bashing pitons into routes and like ascending them that way. There's all sorts of different disciplines. And then you've got ice climbing where you're out chasing down frozen waterfalls, and mixed climbing, which is like climbing those frozen waterfalls and maybe you don't like touch the ground. So you have to like scratch up the rocks adjacent to them and then get onto that icicle. And what I do is technical mountain climbing. And really the way that I think is easiest to explain it is that you're taking those different disciplines of climbing. You're taking that technical rock climbing, you're taking that technical ice climbing and mixed climbing. You're also taking the portions of traditional mountaineering. And I'll say that like competition or indoor climbing feel really far away from what I do, but still I climb in a gym a lot for training. So it is still kind of part of the mix. And I bring those things together and go try to climb these routes in the big mountains of the world that have never been done before and are really, really technically challenging. And those routes and those peaks tend to be in places like the Pakistani Karakoram and the Alaska range of Alaska, in the Andes of South America. And we're going to those places with the idea not of trying to get up the highest peak, but of trying to get up the most challenging peak and get up the most challenging walls on those peaks. And when you start looking at that kind of category, it's amazing how much in this world is left to be done, how much is unclimbed. And so subsequently, that's what I go do, is go look for these really super challenging unclimbed walls or unclimbed peaks in these really incredible remote parts of the world and build teams that are the perfect group of folks to go try something that's really challenging and go and get at them in a way that has a reasonably high chance of success, but also is focused on coming home in one piece.
And then the way that you climb things, I mean, are you on the mountain doing a bunch of camps and spending a month and a half on the mountain? Or is it more quick strike missions without Sherpa and oxygen and all that stuff, and you're just trying to do it quick?
Great question. So yeah, you see those pictures of like people stacked up on Everest, clipped to ropes and things like that. I don't do any of that kind of stuff. The type of climbing that I do is what we refer to as by fair means alpine style climbing. So it's you and me, Mike, up there tied together with a single rope with all of our equipment on our backpacks, leaving base camp and trying to climb the route in a single push. And it really pars down the experience in a way that it does make it much more challenging, but it is more pure. It's more respectful of those environments. You're not leaving trash all over the place. It's much more respectful of local communities because you're not asking local community members to like stick their neck out and go stock camps and fix ropes and kind of get the route all set for you so that you can go up there and it's as easy as possible. And it's just this really, really magical way to spend time in the big mountains of the world. It feels like you're in outer space. You're just out there, just you and your partners and the ropes between you, moving quickly on these really glorious pieces of mountain real estate.
So say you're on a mountain like Everest. Maybe you're not doing one of those big expeditions because that's not what you do. But when you see those groups, those people that pay $100,000 to get up that mountain, do you kind of look at them like the kooks of the mountain who are leaving trash everywhere they go? And does that piss you off?
I'm going to stay away from like really getting at a strong opinion here just because it's not necessary, but it is not what I want to do with my time. You know, spending time up on Everest and taking on one of those trips, like it is a massive effort in terms of like your lungs and legs. You know, you got to be real fit for that. But being up in the mountains and spending time up there in a way where you're like really separated from the geography by infrastructure that has been installed and you're not taking responsibility for all this garbage and shit that's being left on the mountain.
Literally.
That's something I really don't have any interest in taking part of. And I'll share that I went to K2 and tried a new route on K2. K2 is in Pakistan. It's the second highest peak in the world.
Yep.
The local communities call it Chogari. And I went and acclimatized on Broad Peak next door. And we were on the regular route. And it was pretty sad. That climb did not fill my cup in the way that so many others have. You know, there was clearly a group of folks who were there not because they loved the mountains, not because they were inspired to go spend time with people that they adore or try these like really challenging things or form a relationship with those spaces. They were there just to like tell their buddies that they had gotten to the top of this really tall hill. And that was like not what I'm interested in doing.
Fair enough. Well, when I think about why people get into different activities, people ski because it's fun, like roller coaster type fun. And it's a family activity too, so you get your family involved in it as well. But climbing's different. It's harder, it's a challenge. And to get into it as young as you did, were your folks serious climbers or athletes, or how were you first exposed to the sport?
So my folks are not climbers. My kind of origin story is that my parents are actually from Wichita and Salina, Kansas.
No mountains there.
No mountains there, not even close. And they got pregnant and wanted to get as far away from Kansas as they could. So they moved to New Zealand, and that's where they had me and my sister Greer. I was born into a space that is full of mountains. The mountains of New Zealand are some of the fattest mountains on the planet, particularly on the South Island. And then when I was about 4 years old, they moved back to the United States and they moved to the Pacific Northwest, to Seattle. And that's where I grew up. And being in Seattle, I feel like if you have any inclination towards the outdoors, you're either going out to the water or you're going up to the hills.
Sure.
I went up, I went right, I went to the Cascades. And it started with skiing and snowboarding, which I really loved. Then I had some opportunities to go rock climbing and climbing on the Cascadian volcanoes. And initially, those were with the kind of purpose of bringing skis or a snowboard up there in order to slide off the top, because that seemed like a cool thing to do. But pretty quickly, I was leaving that sliding equipment behind and was pretty focused on technical climbing. And in terms of the encouragement from my parents, it's funny for me to think about that because they didn't really understand climbing. And the thing that they did, which I think was really smart, was they set me up with a course to like learn the rope systems and learn about risk management and learn how to like not get killed out there. And I suspect that when they signed me up for that, they were like, cool, this will get it out of his system and then he'll go do something else and that'll be great. And the outcome was pretty much the exact opposite of that. But still, that baseline skill set has been something that has really, really benefited me over the years. You know, the knots and the systems and the ropes and all that stuff is so dang crucial for getting up and more importantly, for getting down. And so I really, really established a pretty strong foundation in that and found myself in a community of people who were valuing that as well, particularly mountain guides, and was able to go climb with them. And then by the time I was 18, all I wanted to do was climbing. And I actually moved back to New Zealand, and that's where I really cut my teeth. I went down there and studied at university. I was really fortunate that they have a socialized education system down there. So I was able to study glaciers and raged hard in the Southern Alps of New Zealand. And by the time I was finished down there, I was climbing some of the hardest peaks and some of the hardest routes in the range and finished university. And that's when I started going on expeditions and started really applying myself to the big mountains of the world.
The next thing I find in your timeline of life is you move back to the States. I think you head to Yosemite. You join up with the search and rescue team. And is that like an elite group of badasses saving both idiots and accomplished people and everybody else in between?
Oh, man, those are some good years down there. I could sit here and talk about Yosemite Search and Rescue all day. I loved that, and I love that culture down there. But the National Park Service provides housing and support to a small group of elite climbers. They've got one team down in the valley in Camp 4, kind of right there below the big walls, and another team that lives up in Tuolumne Meadows, up in the high country, up by all those really stunning granite peaks.
Yep.
And they give those folks a place to live, and they give them work running rescues in that really technical terrain. And your job there is you basically have a pager on your waist and you go climbing all the time in one of the most glorious climbing venues on the planet. And then when your pager goes off, you got to get down and get back to the SAR cache because you're going to save somebody's bacon. And it was a really foundational time for me. You know, we talked earlier about how alpine climbing is kind of an aggregate of all of those different skill sets in climbing. And that skill set of climbing features like El Cap or free climbing on the cracks and faces of Yosemite Valley. Like if you want to climb really hard stuff, those are really, really good skills to have in your back pocket. And so spending all that time down there and learning about how to manage myself in that kind of terrain was crucial to my successes later in my career.
You have that place to just learn and develop your skills more. And while I've known a lot of people, especially in skiing, to drop everything and go chase snow for an amazing trip, I've never really seen anybody drop their whole life to go on an amazing trip. But you have your search and rescue job, you have a girlfriend in Yosemite, and how does it go from having a semi-normal life to just saying, fuck it, I'm going to go climb Mount Bradley in Alaska and see you later, life?
Oh, golly. Let's see. So, I mean, it's like when you go on these expeditions to the big mountains, and particularly when I was younger, before we had better access to like satellite phone technology and stuff like that, like you kind of drop off the face of the earth. And it's something that I'm really careful with now because, you know, if I go to Pakistan for like 3 months, I got to really like check in at home. I got to make sure I'm supporting Shannon as much as I can. Shannon's my wife. And I got to make sure that I'm tending to the home front as much as possible. But back then, I just didn't even worry about that. We just went and fully committed to those objectives. And the purity in that was really something lovely. In those early years of climbing, where I spent a lot of time in Kyrgyzstan and South America and the Alaska range, as well as a lot of other areas around North America, the purity of that time in my life was really special. So after I finished up in Yosemite, I actually got on a geophysics team and was able to go and go like for like 4 or 5 months out of the year, work really hard on these geophysics projects and make a big pile of money. And I would squirrel some of that away for later. And then I would have money to go on expeditions, which meant that I wasn't beholden to sponsors. I wasn't beholden to a career. I kind of had everything that I needed just to go rage in the mountains and see how hard I could climb. And I did that for a lot of years. I mean, there was a point where I was going on like 4 or 5 expeditions a year.
What you're doing is kind of a selfish thing. Like when you have a girlfriend and you just take off and you go on a trip like that, you're putting yourself first. And shit, in your 20s, you should put yourself first. But I'm guessing you probably leave a path of broken hearts and pissed off bosses. But that Mount Bradley trip, when you go there, it sounds like the first attempt, you weren't able to make it up to the summit. And on attempt 2, you had a few unplanned nights on the mountain. And when you climb minimalistically like you do in your alpine style where you're trying to go up fast, I'm sure you're running out or you're running low on supplies. Was that the worst sufferfest that you've ever had to live through?
Oh, funny. Well, yeah, I'll say that in my early 20s, I got dumped a lot, to your earlier point. But to look back on that trip to Mount Bradley, we were talking earlier about this influence of generations before me who told me that I should throw everything away and I should be purely a climber and have that be my entire purpose in life. And during that trip, I was deep in on that. You know, I had a lot of ambition. I also didn't really have that much experience. So when we looked up at that southwest wall of Mount Bradley that rises above the Ruth Gorge in Denali National Park, you know, it was like, oh, cool, that'll take like a day and a half, maybe 2 days, no big deal. I think we thought of it as actually a warm up, which is such a mistake. The route, we thought it was going to take 36 hours. It took 99 hours.
Huh.
We got caught in multiple storms. We had to, like, due to conditions, we had to wrap off the far side of the mountain once we got to the top and ended up on a glacier on the far side of the peak and had to like figure out how to get back around. It was a huge pain in the ass. And I think we were running low on food, you know, on day 2. And then when we actually got to the summit on day 3, like, and kind of like later in the day on day 3, we ate the last of our food, and then it took us another like day and a half to actually get down and around. So yeah, we ran out of food, and yeah, we suffered hard. Is it like the worst I've ever suffered? That's a really interesting question. Probably not. I'd have to say that like some of the injuries, times when I like really had super close calls in terms of like falling in a crevasse and getting stuck down there for a while, or having an ice climb kind of collapse over me and breaking me quite badly, and then having to walk out of the mountains with a broken leg. Like,
yeah,
those times, like, man, that was like real suffering. Those were kind of challenging memories, honestly, to kind of dig back into. But in terms of really stepping out there and intentionally testing our mettle and seeing what we were made of and what we were capable of in the mountains, that Mount Bradley trip was a big deal. And I think it's crucial to note, like, I was like 24 years old and I didn't really know if I could do it. I had put up first ascents in Patagonia and in Kyrgyzstan. I had some big successes, but I didn't really know, you know, if I was capable of like really kind of like stepping onto that cutting edge of climbing. I didn't really feel like I had done it yet at that point. And after that climb, I really came away being like, wow, I really think this is something that I can do. And just as importantly, you know, it didn't come away from that experience where we like ran out of food and got caught in storms and this, that, and the other thing. And I didn't come away from that being like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. This is terrible. It was like every part of me wanted to continue to pursue climbing in that way. And there was so much like clarity and like, this is what I want. And I'm going to pursue this. And also like we made a lot of mistakes on that climb. I need to learn from those mistakes and I need to do better. But this is something I can do and something I should pursue.
And when you come home from a massive achievement like that and you're able to do it and you realize you're able to make that thing happen, in the ski world, people will be talking about it and then the movie would be coming out in the fall and everybody would be getting ready for premiere season to show it off. In the climbing world, does the achievement pretty much become articles in magazines and most of them you're writing?
Yeah, that's a really good question and something that I think is kind of particular to the climbing world. And you know, I think in the ski space, due to the accessibility of those objectives, the fact that there are a lot of times helicopters involved, and honestly that there are larger production budgets involved, you know, that content kind of like is oftentimes like kind of created on its own, or there's a team who's working on it. And something that I really found within the climbing space was that I needed to tell those stories. Like if I didn't tell anybody about it, then nobody was going to know. And some people do that, and I think that's great. But I was really clear with my kind of objectives that like for this to be something that is sustainable and meaningful, that's something that I was going to be able to utilize in order to generate the support that I needed for future expeditions, then I did need to figure out how to kind of capitalize on it. So within that, like started creating movies, started writing articles, started stepping into that space of being like my own PR agent, like learned how to write a press release for when I put up a big route. You know, you don't just assume that people will know about it. You like send it to the mags and you're like, hey, listen, you want to write about it? Here are all the details, making it easy. And that worked. And that afforded future support, that afforded future opportunity to go continue to get better at climbing, go try harder things. And I had some really good advice again on like how to like tell those stories and like create my own brand versus being beholden to somebody else's. And then also later on, how I could be driving some kind of purpose through those stories. Like, yeah. Like go tell them like how badass you are, but also like what impact do you want to have on somebody's life? Like if somebody watches your video, do you just want them to come away and be like, sweet? Or do you want them to come away and be like, oh, I like learned something from that? And that journey of how to leverage stories and content in order to drive change in the world around you was really started at that point. And at first it was like, oh, I'm trying to drive support. I want to be a sponsored athlete so I can climb more. And then it was like, oh, I want to like encourage people to like get outside and form a relationship with the outdoors or like get into climbing because I think climbing is sweet. And then the whole kind of like climate policy, social equity work has come along as kind of a logical progression on that and has really developed into something where like I'm real clear about like if there's some content made about me or that I'm making content, like here's what I wanted to do and here's what I needed to do. And let's like figure out how we can do that together.
Nice. So I guess when I think about other media in your sport, not the stuff that you're creating, but looking at climbing in general, the biggest thing that's happened in the sport, at least in my opinion, and I'm not right in it, so I don't know, but free solo created a ton of media around the sport. And with something like that, is that a good thing because it helps grow the sport? Or is it almost a bad thing because more people want to climb without ropes?
Oh, man. I mean, that's a really complicated question. I will start by saying that climbing for me has undoubtedly had a positive impact on my life. And a lot of the work that I do through my own storytelling and content and through my roles at organizations like the American Alpine Club is to be able to broaden the scope of who has access to climbing, who has those opportunities. How do we make so it's not just like some West Coast white kid dirtbag sport? How do we like broaden the scope so that more people can have that opportunity to like learn about themselves in the way that I have in the mountains and on the cliffs? And how do we make sure that they're able to do that in a manner that is safe and well facilitated and is something that has a positive outcome? And free solo undoubtedly did a lot of work in that regard. It opened a lot of people's minds to climbing, showed them what it looked like, showed them what it's like. Now, the climbing without ropes thing, I'll be really clear. I don't free solo. Don't post pictures of me without a helmet on.
But you've had accidents where that's happened, right? Like you won an award in New Zealand a long time ago and it seemed like you went up without a rope and broke yourself off really bad, like in 2010 or 11.
Yeah, I mean, I actually had a rope when that accident happened. I didn't earlier in the day.
Okay.
So if I hadn't had a rope on when I got hit by that icicle, I wouldn't be here right now. It was a real fortunate that I decided to tie in. But yeah, when I was younger, I did free solo quite a bit. And that was like a decision I actually made a bunch of years ago, kind of with my wife, was like free soloing isn't something that I want to portray. It's not something that was going to like help at all with my personal longevity. And so let's just cut it out. And so I don't do it anymore. But yeah, like free solo, did it expose people to climbing and that is something they can do? Like, absolutely. Did it demonstrate a form of climbing that is something that I wouldn't recommend? And it's something that I would rather see another form of climbing as like the top piece of content that has ever been created about climbing? For sure. And it's really interesting, Mike, because that same year, a film called The Dawn Wall came out, which is all about Tommy Caldwell and Kevin Jorgensen up on this really, really hard route up on El Cap. And it was this movie that was all about partnership. And it was all about keeping it safe and keeping it rubber side down and being smart on the mountain. And it's funny, like when people ask me about movies to watch or about climbing, I don't recommend free solo. First off, most people have seen it. Second off, it is like this niche form of the sport that not that many people do and is like hyper dangerous and is not something that I would recommend that people participate in. And I don't say that to like diminish Alex's achievement on El Cap. Like free soloing free rider is incredibly badass. It demonstrates an amazing level of mastery. It is a huge accomplishment in climbing. But I would say the same thing about what Kevin and Tommy did on the Dawn Wall and that film that came out about their experience on the Dawn Wall is this really, really powerful film about partnership, about a really, really technical badass climb, and about doing so in a way that does like push the limits of what is possible in a like really incredible way, but in a way that also the safety margins are much, much broader.
Okay. And kind of going into the last part of this podcast that I want to talk about, because we definitely talked a little bit longer than I wanted to, and that's great because you had some amazing things to say, but I'm going to cut this part a little bit shorter than I normally do because I like to talk about money a lot. I'm Jewish. Are you Jewish too?
I'm not Jewish. Oftentimes asked this due to my last name, Zimmerman, but
yeah.
No, like Kansas Presbyterian.
And I should not bring up money when I talk about religion because I know that pisses off some of my fellow Jews out there when I do that. So they can pretend like they didn't hear that. But in talking about money for you, when you wanted to get sponsored as a climber, you did what a lot of skiers do. You went to the trade show and it seemed like it was just like a beer drinking fest for you. How were you able to eventually get yourself sponsored outside of going to a trade show? Because I think you took a route that not everybody takes.
Yeah. At that trade show, at the end of that, I got some really good advice from somebody who's become a really big mentor of mine, Kai Bune. And he was like, listen, man, don't just like sell yourself in order to try to get sponsored and try to go climbing. Like there are other pathways. Like determine what your brand is and what you want to do. Figure out how to pay for this stuff. Like sponsorship can be part of the mix, but make sure that that mix is diversified enough so that you're able to make your own decisions so that you can say no when maybe you're asked to do something that is not safe or not with the right people. And I really took that advice to heart. And I've been a professional mountain climber, but I've always had a job outside of that. And it's something that when I was younger was like kind of crucial because I didn't really have that much money coming from sponsorships. I didn't have that much support. And I think it's something that in the end has resulted in more financial security, like long-term financial security. Like most athlete contracts are year by year.
Right.
So to have a job outside of that, that's like, cool. If like all my sponsorships went away, would it be a pain in the ass? Would I be really sad? Absolutely. Would it be like, oh, I don't have any money? No, it wouldn't be that. But it started when I was younger and I was paying for trips and I didn't have any sponsorship. I would do any job I could to pay for trips. It was like tooth and nail to make money in any way I could. I mean, I worked at grocery stores. I worked at gear shops. I worked construction. I worked in refrigeration. I did all sorts of stuff. And then I ended up on the Yosemite search and rescue team, and that was really awesome. And then I started working, as a project manager on a geophysics team, and that was mostly working in like northeastern Africa and northern Canada, going and looking for rare earth minerals. And I would go do that for like 4 or 5 months out of the year. And then, in a story I won't get into, I kind of fell out of love with that job in a really big way and launched a film production company that was leaning into skill sets that I had developed as an athlete, and started making films and ran that for about 6 years with a co-owner, Jim, and then stepped in with POW. And it's given me more security. It's given me more grounding. And it's made it so that like now at 37, I've made a fair amount of money from these different roles, and I've like saved a bunch of it because I was being a dirtbag athlete. And that's super helpful in terms of now having a down payment for a house or whatever. And so like for me, part of that equation that has been really crucial is being super specific with what I am aiming towards as a climber. So I set really clear objectives for what I want to do. And then I gear 6 to 12 months towards those objectives in order to make sure I'm prepared. And what that looks like is when I'm at home in Bend, I'm not normally like at the crag for like a full day of just kind of going rock climbing. I pretty rarely go for just like a long kind of mellow day of ski touring or go kind of quest around. Like I have blocks of time to train and like build that preparation, and I spend that preparing. It's not like fun time. Now, I'm really fortunate that I love training. It is something that I love to do. So I do enjoy that stuff, but like I'm not kind of out there to have a good time. I'm out there to like train and prep and strategize and be ready for those objectives that are the things that matter most to me. And those tend to be big mountain faces in remote zones. And so it's like I'm preparing for those things. And then when it's time to go to the mountains, I show up and I'm present and physically prepared and mentally prepared and able to kind of put away work for a little while and go and see if we can't get those things done. And, it's a little bit, I don't know, super organized or whatever at times, but I love it. It's worked really well.
Well, I never hear athletes talk about being super organized, so it's refreshing to hear that here. But one thing I do need to get out of you before we get into my final segment of the show is, who are the brands that sponsor you?
Thank you for asking. So Outdoor Research, we talked about earlier, has been a part of this journey with me for a really, really long time. And we have a really powerful partnership. And then I do a lot of work with Tin Cup Mountain Whiskey.
Yep.
That's a little bit newer. I've been with them since about 2020. And, drinking whiskey is a big part of our tradition in climbing and in skiing, and is like a big part of kind of like our community. And Tin Cup Whiskey is great. They've also really been willing to follow my lead, and they've invested in me and my brand and my career in a way that has been really gratifying. And we've gotten a lot of badass work done together. And then I work with Scarpa, who is a Italian footwear company.
Yep.
And when it comes to the most important parts of clothing that you wear while climbing, it's your gloves, which OR makes, and their gloves are incredible. And it's your footwear. That's the two places where you're like touching the tools and touching the medium on which you're climbing. And it's like there's two places where I can't compromise. And the Scarpa equipment is unbelievably good. Also, some of their work in this kind of social equity space in climbing is like best in class. And it's something they've really brought me in on, and I've been able to do a lot of work on, which has been super, super cool. And then the other primary brand that I work with is Exped USA. They're a Swiss expedition equipment manufacturing company. We've done a ton of design work together. They're like awesome to work with. They consistently make badass gear. And once again, a really long-term relationship that's been super fruitful. And outside of that, I work with Jolba Sunglasses. I work with First Descent Coffee out of Crested Butte. I work with Trail Butter, who makes a bunch of nutrition products here in Oregon. And I work with a few other smaller brands with smaller levels of support. But Outdoor Research, Tin Cup, Scarpa, and Exped are the big four.
All right, so that is the body of our podcast. And I'm not a climber, so hopefully my questions were a little bit different than the ones you get from most people.
No, that was awesome. I like really am enjoying this.
Okay. And at this point, I have something that I call inappropriate questions. That's how I close every show out. Yeah. And I get someone that to ask you 3 questions, and they can be anything. And I was able to get a guy who starts off this podcast, because you're going to be with someone else in the podcast. He's the Outdoor Research VP of Brand. I'm talking about Chris King. He's going to ask you 3 questions. And are you ready for question number 1 from Chris King?
Yeah, I'm ready for question number 1 from Chris King.
All right. And he kept it not as inappropriate, as you guys have a working relationship together. So I might spin them to be more inappropriate if I feel the need to. Here we go.
Okay, great. Here we go.
I would love to get your opinion on the current face of social media and being an outdoor athlete. Would love to know where you think it's all going and how you feel about it.
Oh man, I feel like that's like an industry question.
But let's spin it. I talked to Chris about social media because there was a situation that OR was involved with earlier this year that's in the podcast already. So let's think about social media. What's the biggest mistake that you've seen an athlete make in social media that maybe not has ruined their career, but has definitely had an impact on it?
Gosh, in terms of a mistake that somebody has made, well, I don't know if I have a specific example, but I will say that social media has given the broader world access to our lives in a way that it has never had before. And I think there's oftentimes this sense of kind of in the athlete space or in the influencer space or in the celebrity space of like, you need to share everything. And, you need to give people full access to your world. And it's something that I really think hard about in terms of when I not only do my own social work, but also when advising particularly younger folks in our community in terms of like how they are sharing out. And I think that you need to understand what your role is and what you want to share with the world, and also what you want to keep to yourself, what you want to be private. And I think that's really crucial. And I think when I see folks who's just like in kind of an influencer space and they're just like putting everything on their social media channels, it makes me kind of sad because I see these folks who they're not keeping anything to themselves. And that's not to say that you should keep secrets because you're going to like do something bad. It's more like understand what your brand is and look at it as a business, look at it as something that you need to like manage and really be intentional with what that is and understand that you as a person can and should be different. And that's good and that's okay. Yeah. So like when I think about my social media, like you don't see that much of my marriage on there. You know, there are a lot of parts of my life that you don't see that much of. It's primarily advocacy and climbing and training. And sure, things show up. But yeah, I like try to be really intentional about that because that's what people expect from me. That's what people want to get from me. That's what my brand is. And it allows for me to like be really intentional about what I put out there in the world. And that not only makes it better, I think, but also makes my life a lot easier.
Well, kids out there, you should listen to this because at 37 years old, you have a much better perspective than you do at 22. And it makes it a lot easier to not post things and not put yourself out there for people to get pissed off or just be like, ugh, they're oversharing.
Yeah, dude. I mean, if I don't have kids, but if I had like a 12-year-old or a 14-year-old, I would put them through a branding exercise of like what they want their social media to be. And like, it doesn't need to be like anything to do with being an athlete or whatever. Just like, what do you want to share? And like, use that as a filter for how you make decisions about what you put out in the world. It's like, these kids are like fucking building a brand at 12. They don't even know what a brand is. It's crazy.
It is crazy. All right, we're going to jump into question number 2.
I mean, I would love to know, how do you go to the bathroom when you're making these amazing first descents?
I love that question.
Oh boy, Chris is going there. Great. Well, we abide by leave no trace principles, and we make sure that we leave the mountains cleaner than how we found them.
How about if you have diarrhea? Because that's going to be hard to clean up.
I mean, I think the short of it is that like sometimes you just got to stick your ass out in the cold and get involved. And that's just got to be okay because human nature happens. And, you know, there are like specific techniques for like when it's really, really steep or whatever. But I think that maybe the thing to share is like when I was younger, I would like try to hold it. It was never a good deal. Like if you got to go, like find a spot, find a way, make it happen and do so in a way that like doesn't befoul the environment. That's just kind of got to be the deal.
Yeah, you definitely don't want to hold it. I'm not going to tell who this story is about because I think I would embarrass him, but I own someone who we sent to a summer camp once, and it was a week-long camp, and he decided to hold it the whole week, and when he came home, he was in the bathroom for like 6 hours, and it was like, dude, that is unhealthy. You can't hold that for a week, but I'm not going to say who that was.
Yeah, dude, that is not good for your insides.
All right, so we will jump into your final inappropriate question.
Not so much inappropriate, but would love to hear, you know, given on the sustainability path Graham has been on, I would love to know where he feels the biggest challenges are and any challenges he's faced in the last year as far as programs or people or where he really needs to push through the wall in order to be great.
All right, and then I will follow that up with who's doing the worst job with sustainability that he sees. And I think that's important because this is inappropriate questions. And we don't need to hear the good things that are going on because this is supposed to be inappropriate. But when you think about sustainability, there's some companies that are doing great things. There are some companies that aren't doing great things. And while I'm not asking you to call anybody out, I am asking you to call people out. Who's doing the worst job with sustainability that you see out there?
Oh, man. I mean, probably ExxonMobil, right?
Nice, safe answer there. I like it.
You know, I think that when I look at the sustainability space, when I look at like companies in the climbing world, there's this term that gets thrown around, which is T minus A equals 0. Talk minus action equals 0. And when you start putting that into the kind of parlance of like sustainability, you start talking about greenwashing. You start talking about like saying words that represent sustainability and clean energy and being green, but without the action required to actually drive those movements forward. I do think that is something that when you see companies doing that, it is really destructive. Like if you're going to talk about it, you got to make sure your actions are backing up your words. And I think it's also crucial to note that like T minus A equals 0, but it doesn't go the other way. Like action on its own is awesome. Take action. You don't always need to talk about it. But if you're going to talk about it, you're going to put it up front in terms of your branding, in terms of your messaging. You better be putting your money where your mouth is.
And we've always said that talk is cheap.
Yeah, man. So in terms of like the biggest challenge, like we're talking about ExxonMobil, we're talking about Shell, we're talking about BP, and like they are the ones who invented the idea of the carbon footprint. They are the ones who pushed the idea of personal change as the way that we fix climate. That was a marketing plan and a PR push that was designed by them. If you want to dig into that, like there's a great investigative podcast called Drilled by a woman named Amy Westervelt But like that is on them. And they did a great job getting all of us who give a shit about the outdoors in order to like start pointing the finger at each other and just like leave the corporations to have free reign over what they do. And it is disenfranchised and disempowered a lot of people who could otherwise have a really powerful voice. And when I talk to folks in the outdoor rec economy, what at POW we refer to as the outdoor state, all the folks in this country who get involved with outdoor recreation, they're all people who have stories about climate because they are spending time in these environments that are getting impacted by climate. And what that comes down to is that those stories, that relationship with space, that is one of the most potent and powerful tools that anybody has in order to drive the change that we need when it comes to systemic climate action. And when I think about one of the biggest challenges that we have, it is to get people empowered to utilize their stories and get people to stop nitpicking at each other and instead move towards collective action on climate. We spend so much time talking shit about the influencers and the community members who are out there really trying to drive this work. And if we put that energy towards driving systemic action, towards our democracy, towards the political action needed in order to make these changes, man, we'd get so much further along. So like, get on board, understand that you need to be part of the solution. And yes, we should be asking each other hard questions, but also we shouldn't be assholes. We should be supporting the people who are trying to change the world around us, and we should be getting involved. And those of us in the outdoor economy, in the outdoor recreation economy, in the community, we have badass stories that can be utilized to drive this change. And we're also a community that indexes super highly on like being courageous, doing audacious things. And that is like one of the baseline skill sets and qualities that is needed in order to drive the climate action that we need. So stop making bullshit comments on Instagram and get out there and like find ways to take charge and take action and leverage your story in order to drive the change that we need. It's what the world needs. It's what our community and the outdoors that we love deserve. And it's a lot more productive than just like taking pot shots from behind an Instagram account.
So what he's saying is leave Caroline Gleick alone. She's trying to make a difference and people are messing with her, and there's no reason to do that because she's actually trying to do some work.
She's not trying to do work, dude. She's fucking doing work.
Yeah, she's doing work.
People who are taking pot shots at her like are full of shit and should stop.
For sure. But I know she's been attacked over the years plenty of times, and it's kind of ridiculous because she's always put her money where her mouth is.
My guy, it drives me bananas. Caroline is a huge inspiration for me and many of the others in our community. And the fact that she gets so much shit for it is really awful. It's totally undeserved.
I totally agree. Well, Graham, that's our podcast. And really, while your book is something that I know everyone's going to enjoy, there's something more to just chatting with you that gives a little bit more insight into the person that you are and what makes you tick. So I thank you for making the time, and I thank you for sending me the book.
Hey, thank you. I super appreciate it. This has been really fun. And also, you asked some great questions. I will share, like, particularly the process questions you asked are things that people haven't been digging into. So thank you for being thoughtful. Thank you for checking out the book. And thank you for having me on. This has been a pleasure.
So that was time with the boys from Outdoor Research. And what an episode. A little business, a lot of athlete. And for me, this one took me out of my comfort zone. I wanted to see if I could step into someone else's world and not be fake or anything, but still produce a great interview. And I believe I did that. Please let me know what you think. You can email me at mike@thepowellmovement.com with all your questions and concerns, and you can let me know how I did with this climbing episode. While you're at it, please review me wherever you listen to the show. And please, please, please support my incredible sponsors. They are Stanley, Outdoor Research, Best Day Brewing, Elan Skis, and Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. Have a great week, everyone.